Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. My name is Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're going to be talking about grunge music and, really what killed the grunge era. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group. There's another one for our merch page. We've got links for the Spotify and Apple Music playlists on there, and also for the Patreon page. So make sure you go check all those out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a little thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So the birth of grunge music, I think on a bigger scale, at least a scale at which the mainstream kind of paid attention to it, was probably 91, I think. That's when Nevermind was released. Super Unknown was released also that year. So even though there was some grunge music that was coming out of the Seattle area prior to that, I think that's kind of when everyone started paying attention to it. And when I talk about grunge music, or when we talk about grunge music is a very small, select era of music.
Like a snapshot.
A snapshot, yeah. And it really kind of ran from I'd say 1990 to 1994 is kind of like the end of the grunge era. And there's some bands like Pearl Jam that people like to put into that genre, which Pearl Jam is, I've always looked at Pearl Jam, and I think even bands like Nirvana really looked at Pearl Jam as a little bit more of an alternative band than say grunge.
And their music is a bit more straightforward, kind of just hard rock.
Yeah. Yeah. And grunge music, at like its basic level, was really more like an offshoot of punk than traditional rock music. I think it was like punk mixed with some, heavy metal kind of stuff to really kind of fuse together and make what grunge was. And I think, and I don't think bands like Pearl Jam really kind of would be involved in that.
If they do, it's just the album 10. Because beyond that, they expanded their sound a bit more. But I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. But as far as like the death of grunge and what really killed off grunge music, I think you hit it perfectly before we started recording.
I think the record companies destroyed grunge by exploiting it and over commercializing it, and they did the same thing with punk to a degree. Yeah. But I think punk was kind of
always kind of like self-limiting. Like there was going to be an end to punk music.
Well, that and not only that, but it was also not. It didn't blow up the way that grunge did. Yeah. And so quickly, so it was able to kind of survive past it a little bit, whereas grunge was like, it exploded, like you said, 4 years, maybe 5 years in the mainstream, and the record companies just, ate it up and totally exploited it.
Absolutely. And I think the as far as like the end of grunge music, I look at the death of Kurt Cobain. I think it was really kind of the nail in the coffin for grunge music. I think at that point, I think a lot of labels looked at grunge music, even though a lot of grunge had kind of moved on and was doing some other stuff at that point. I think a lot of labels looked at grunge bands and didn't really see them as marketable as they were, prior to his death.
92, yeah. Well, and you pointed out, In Utero, the last Nirvana album, was already just musically, stylistically moving away from that anyway. Yeah. So, grunge probably was on borrowed time regardless. Yeah. But between that and, like you pointed out before we were on camera, the excessive drug use that led to a lot of overdoses of some of those artists. Shannon Hoon and I wouldn't classify Blind Melon as grunge, but they all kind of came up together, even though it's kind of like comparing the Stones to the Who. I mean, they're very different bands, but they kind of all came up together, and that drug use really did play a part in some of that loss because it was such a small snapshot of a time. Mm-hmm. You start losing your greats, through suicide / murder, to drug use and drug abuse and overdose. Yeah. What do you have left?
Exactly.
Be like losing half of the Beatles in 1965.
Exactly. So grunge was definitely much more of a smaller genre than a lot of people, I think, really give it credit for. But grunge music did spawn a lot of that alternative and things like that. Pearl Jam, that
it is essentially
Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah, what became alternative rock. If there wasn't that grunge boom in the early 90s, we wouldn't have had alternative rock. We wouldn't have had a lot of the rock that we got in the 90s to the early 2000s.
Yeah, Smashing Pumpkins, another great alternative band that probably wouldn't have existed, at least in the mainstream, if it weren't for that early grunge period that was so great, burned really hot, really bright, and kind of burned out pretty quickly.
I think grunge also kind of brought punk music back into the mainstream a little bit, and that's how you get bands like Green Day and Rancid and stuff like that. I mean, even though Rancid and Operation Ivy, that goes a little bit different, but I don't think it would have hit the mainstream if there hadn't been that early grunge thing to say, okay, maybe the record companies could take a chance on some of this less traditional rock music. And at that point, it was the hair bands that was dominating, and which, I mean, arguably the grunge destroyed.
Well, I wouldn't really say that, because there were some of those bands that you would consider, hair metal bands that actually still carried on and had great careers and were releasing great albums in 93, 94, 95.
Yeah, and I actually think Guns N' Roses was more responsible for getting rid of that, at least the glam element of hair metal, because they showed that you could be kind of harder edged. You didn't have to be spandex and big hair and makeup and singing songs like Unskinny Bop.
Yeah.
You could be a little bit more,
a little heavier,
a little darker, and more realistic about your music.
Yeah. But you're right. I think the over commercialization of grunge music in that early period, I think, was really kind of its downfall.
Yeah, because to be honest, if Kurt Cobain hadn't died and had continued, I think he would have probably had made a few more albums, and grunge would have pretty much gone away anyway, because he would have been changing his sound. I mean,
well, like you said, with In Utero, you could hear that progression in their music from Nevermind, which was their first album.
First big album, because Bleach came out first.
Their first commercial, huge hit.
But yeah, you're right. There was definitely, just in that 3-year period, already a huge shift. And
I didn't mention Incesticide because it's kind of a compilation B-side album.
And actually that shift that we're talking about is you can truly see that in the Unplugged.
Yeah.
Because you can see where there's the musicianship is changing.
Yes.
So I don't think grunge would have survived much past that, but it's arguably the record labels, they bled it dry very quickly. And, for what it's worth, I'm glad we got it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because like I said, it
was a great time for music, and
absolutely.
And it really, like we already said, it really kind of led into a lot of other just great music in the 90s.
Yeah, you can't deny that if Nevermind hadn't come out, we wouldn't have had 10 by Pearl Jam or
Core,
Purple. Yeah, and I mean any of those.
Yeah.
Melancholy. Even bands like Live from the whole other side of the country in Pennsylvania. They wouldn't have been able to come up in that era if it hadn't been for Kurt Cobain.
Somebody opening up
the door to something different than what we were already getting.
Absolutely. So. Well, that's all we get for you guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think about grunge and really kind of what ended that era of that genre of music. It's a genre of music that I love, and I love a lot of those bands from that time period. But let us know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.